In 1869, the first transcontinental railroad was completed in the United States. The official story is simple. Westward expansion required connection, settlers needed supply lines, and industrial progress demanded steel veins across the continent. But in 1870, the year after completion, fewer than 40,000 people lived in the entire Nevada territory. The railroad that crossed it could move 200,000 passengers annually. The infrastructure existed at a scale 20 times larger than the population it served. That's not an estimate. That's census data. And it wasn't isolated. The Great Western Railway in England, completed in 1841, was engineered to accommodate double-track express service between London and Bristol before Bristol's population justified half that capacity. The Erie Railroad, finished in 1851, cut through regions where towns didn't exist yet. The demand came later. Decades later in some cases. This is a documentary exploration of historical infrastructure patterns. The content ahead examines architectural records, census data, and engineering documentation without asserting definitive conclusions. What follows is an investigation of timing, scale, and institutional consistency across multiple regions during the 19th century. Stand on the platform of almost any major railway station built before 1880, and something feels disproportionate. The ceiling vault's too high. The platform's too wide. The ticket hall's designed for crowds that wouldn't arrive for another generation. London Street Pancras, completed in 1868, had capacity for traffic levels the city wouldn't reach until the 1890s. Philadelphia's Broad Street Station, opened in 1881, was built to handle congestion that didn't exist yet. The standard explanation holds that visionary planners anticipated growth, that engineers built for the future, that civic ambition drove over design. But the pattern repeats with unusual precision. In 1851, the Hudson River Railroad completed a line connecting New York City to Albany. The population of the counties it passed through totaled roughly 650,000 people. The railway's cargo capacity could move 8 million tons annually. Agricultural output in those counties at the time didn't exceed 2 million tons. The gap wasn't minor. The infrastructure was built to a scale 4 times larger than the economic activity it served. The same year, across the Atlantic, Britain's Midland Railway expanded into regions where industrial output hadn't yet justified the investment. Shareholders questioned the expenditure. The company's response, recorded in board minutes, referenced future necessity, without specifying what that necessity would be. The future arrived. But the infrastructure was already waiting. Consider the technical specifications. The London and Birmingham Railway, completed in 1838, included bridges rated for loads far exceeding the weight of trains operating at the time. Tunnels were bored wider than the rolling stock required. Stations were constructed with platforms long enough for train configurations that wouldn't be standard for another 20 years. This wasn't guesswork. These were deliberate engineering choices, executed with precision, funded at enormous cost, justified by demand projections that hadn't materialized yet. In the United States, the pattern intensified after 1865. The post-Civil War railway boom saw lines extended into territories where populations were measured in hundreds, not thousands. The Kansas Pacific Railway, completed in 1870, crossed 638 miles of prairie. Census records from 1870 show an average population density along the route of fewer than 2 people per square mile. The railroad could move 50,000 passengers a month. There weren't 50,000 people living within 50 miles of the track. The timing creates friction. Railways were capital-intensive projects requiring years of planning, surveying, and construction. They demanded financial backing, legislative approval, land acquisition, and labor coordination. These weren't speculative ventures thrown together on optimism. They were institutional undertakings backed by governments, corporations, and banking syndicates. And yet, they were built before the economic conditions existed to justify them. The Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad expanded through Iowa in the 1850s, ahead of settlement. The Northern Pacific Railway, chartered in 1864, received federal land grants to build across the Dakota and Montana territories before those regions had functioning civil governments. The infrastructure preceded the institutions it was meant to serve. By 1880, the United States had over 93,000 miles of operational railway track. The population was 50 million. That's nearly 2 miles of track per 1,000 people. By comparison, in 1980, with a population of 227 million, the US had 164,000 miles of track. The ratio had dropped to 0.7 miles per thousand people. The earlier era was more densely tracked relative to population than the later one. The British experience mirrors this. By 1850, Britain had 6,000 miles of railway serving a population of roughly 21 million. By 1900, the network had expanded to 18,000 miles, but the population had grown to 37 million. The rate of expansion didn't match population growth. The infrastructure had front-loaded. Then there's the architectural consistency. Railway stations built across England, the United States, and parts of continental Europe between 1840 and 1880 share a design language that transcends regional variation. The same vaulted iron and glass roofs. The same limestone or brick facades. The same platform configurations. Grand Central Depot in New York, opened in 1871. St. Pancras in London, 1868. Gare du Nord in Paris, 1864. They don't just resemble each other stylistically. They share structural principles. The use of wrought iron, the spanning techniques, the integration of passenger flow with freight handling. These weren't coincidences. They were institutional templates, executed with minor variation across continents. And the systems appeared in a compressed time frame. Between 1830 and 1880, the foundational railway networks of the United States and Britain were not only designed but completed. 50 years to lay the infrastructural groundwork for empires that hadn't fully formed yet. The question isn't whether railways were visionary. The question is how the vision was so consistent, so synchronized, and so precisely scaled to demands that hadn't yet emerged. The financial mechanisms behind this construction add another layer. Railway companies operated on future revenue models. Bonds were sold. Stock was issued. Investors were promised returns based on traffic that didn't exist. And yet, the capital flowed. The railways were built. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, set a precedent. It connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic before the population of the Great Lakes region justified the expense. Within 20 years, the region's population exploded, and the canal became essential. The railway boom followed the same model, but at a larger scale and with less delay between construction and utilization. It's as though the infrastructure wasn't responding to growth. It was anticipating it with unusual accuracy. The anticipation wasn't vague. It was specific. In 1862, the Pacific Railroad Act authorized construction of a transcontinental line across territories that were still being surveyed. The route passed through regions where the U.S. government had yet to establish postal service, let alone towns. But the engineering specifications were already determined. Track gauge, 4 feet, 8.5 inches. Maximum gradient, 116 feet per mile. Minimum curve radius, 400 feet. These weren't flexible guidelines. They were standards, applied uniformly across thousands of miles of empty terrain. The same standards appeared in Britain decades earlier. The Great Western Railway, designed by Isambard Kingdom Brunel, used a broader gauge, 7 feet, 0.25 inches, but applied it with the same institutional consistency. Every station, every bridge, every tunnel built to the same specifications. The system was uniform before the traffic existed to test it. By the 1850s, Britain's railway network had adopted a de facto standard track gauge. It wasn't legislated. It emerged through coordination among private companies, government agencies, and engineering boards. The result was a system that functioned as though it had been planned centrally, even though it was built by competing entities. The administrative similarity is difficult to account for using conventional models of organic development. Consider the Erie Railroad again. Completed in 1851, it stretched 483 miles from the Hudson River to Lake Erie. It was the longest single railway line in the world at the time. The regions it connected had a combined population of under 800,000. The railroad's freight capacity could handle 10 million tons annually. There was no industrial base to generate that volume. No mines, no factories, no agricultural output remotely near that scale. The infrastructure was built as though the industry already existed. Within 30 years, it did. Iron foundries appeared along the route. Coal extraction expanded. Grain production in the Great Lakes region surged. The Erie Railroad didn't just serve that growth. It preceded it with an accuracy that feels less like prediction and more like prior knowledge. The same sequence repeats in the American Midwest. The Illinois Central Railroad, completed in 1856, was granted 2.6 million acres of federal land to build a line through central Illinois. The population density of the region at the time was roughly 12 people per square mile. The railroad was engineered to move 100,000 passengers and 5 million tons of freight annually. The land grants weren't contingent on existing demand. They were speculative instruments, awarded based on the assumption that the infrastructure itself would generate the economy to sustain it. And it did. But the assumption required certainty about future settlement patterns, agricultural development, and industrial investment. Certainty that shouldn't have existed in 1856. The British experience offers a parallel. The Midland Railway's expansion into the East Midlands in the 1840s cut through regions with minimal industrial activity. Yet the rail infrastructure included freight depots, goods sheds, and marshalling yards designed for heavy industrial traffic. The coal mines that would eventually justify those facilities didn't reach peak output until the 1870s. The infrastructure was in place 30 years early. Then there's the question of labor. Building a railway required thousands of workers, coordinated across hundreds of miles, supplied with materials, tools, and food. The logistics were staggering. The Central Pacific Railroad, working eastward from Sacramento in the 1860s, employed over 12,000 laborers at its peak, most of them Chinese immigrants. They were housed in temporary camps, fed through supply lines that stretched back to San Francisco, and coordinated through a management structure that rivaled military operations. The organizational capacity required to execute this didn't emerge overnight. It required institutional experience, administrative systems, and logistical frameworks that functioned as though they'd been in place for decades. Yet the systems appeared fully formed in the 1860s, applied to a continent that had barely been surveyed. The financial instruments supporting this construction are equally striking. Railway bonds became one of the dominant investment vehicles of the 19th century. By 1870, railway securities accounted for nearly 60% of all traded assets on the New York Stock Exchange. Investors were buying debt tied to infrastructure that served populations that didn't yet exist, in regions that hadn't been settled, based on revenue projections that had no historical precedent. The market absorbed it. The bonds sold. The railways were built. In Britain, railway investment reached speculative mania during the 1840s, a period known as railway mania. Between 1844 and 1847, over 9,000 miles of track were authorized by Parliament. Much of it was never built, but the capital was raised, the surveys were completed, and the institutional machinery to coordinate construction at that scale was already in place. The capacity to build preceded the decision to build. Storage infrastructure followed the same pattern. Railway freight depots constructed in the 1860s and 1870s included warehouses, grain elevators, and coal bunkers designed for throughput levels that wouldn't be reached until the 1890s. The Great Northern Railway's depot in Minneapolis, completed in 1881, could store 2 million bushels of grain. Minnesota's wheat production in 1881 was 35 million bushels, but most of it was stored locally on farms. The centralized storage capacity existed before the centralized distribution system required it. By 1900, centralized grain storage had become standard. The infrastructure had been waiting. The telegraph network developed in tandem with the railways, and it followed the same logic. Western Union, founded in 1851, expanded its telegraph lines alongside railroad construction. By 1861, the transcontinental telegraph was complete. It connected cities that were still being founded, transmitting messages through territories where the population hadn't yet arrived. The communication grid was in place before the society it was meant to connect. Then there's the power grid. While large-scale electrical grids didn't emerge until the 1880s, the gas lighting infrastructure that preceded it followed a similar trajectory. Urban gas networks in London, New York, and Philadelphia were built in the 1850s and 1860s to serve populations that hadn't yet concentrated at the densities required to justify the expense. The pipes were laid. The distribution systems were installed. The regulatory frameworks were established. The demand followed, but the infrastructure had been embedded into the urban fabric first. The cross-regional consistency extends to regulatory frameworks. Railway charters in the United States and railway acts in Britain shared structural similarities despite being drafted by different legislative bodies in different political contexts. They addressed the same issues: land acquisition, eminent domain, safety standards, financial liability. The legal language wasn't identical, but the institutional thinking behind it was. It's as though the frameworks were adapted from a common source, rather than developed independently. Administrative records from the period reinforce this. Railway company archives, government surveys, and engineering reports from the 1850s through the 1880s demonstrate a level of bureaucratic sophistication that feels inconsistent with frontier conditions. The records are detailed, systematic, and formatted with institutional consistency. They read less like the chaotic output of a developing nation and more like the administrative products of an established system. The pattern compounds. Railways built ahead of demand. Storage facilities constructed before the goods existed. Communication grids installed before the messages needed sending. Power distribution networks embedded before the density required it. All of it executed with institutional precision, financial backing, and regulatory coherence that shouldn't have been possible in the timeframes involved. And all of it appearing in a compressed 50-year window, across multiple continents, in regions with vastly different political and economic conditions. The official explanation remains: visionary planning, industrial ambition, and speculative investment. But the synchronization suggests something else. The term Tartaria appears on European maps from the 16th through 19th centuries. It referred to the vast territories of Central Asia, Siberia, and parts of Eastern Europe, regions largely outside direct European control. The name wasn't a nation. It was a geographical label, used inconsistently, often denoting areas that were unmapped or poorly understood. By the early 20th century, the term had disappeared from official use. In recent years, Tartaria has been reinterpreted. It's now used as shorthand for a broader question: whether the infrastructure of the 19th century reflects inheritance rather than invention. Whether the systems that appeared so rapidly, so uniformly, and at such scale were built entirely within the timeframe attributed to them, or whether they represent the adaptation of something older. Three interpretive models exist. The first, conventional progress. Industrialization enabled rapid construction. Visionary planners anticipated growth. Financial markets supported speculative ventures. The infrastructure was built ahead of demand because that's how empires expand. The second, institutional inheritance. The administrative systems, engineering standards, and regulatory frameworks didn't emerge organically. They were adapted from prior structures, whether colonial, imperial, or otherwise, that had already developed the institutional capacity required to coordinate construction at continental scale. The third, physical inheritance. The railways, stations, tunnels, and depots weren't entirely new. They were restorations, adaptations, or extensions of infrastructure that predated the official construction dates. The consistency across regions reflects not coordination, but commonality of origin. None of these models can be definitively proven with available evidence. Each accounts for different aspects of the pattern. What remains undisputed is the timing. The railway networks of Britain and the United States were largely complete by 1880. The administrative systems to manage them were operational. The financial instruments to fund them were standardized. The populations to justify them arrived later. In 1816, the year following the eruption of Mount Tambora, global temperatures dropped. Crops failed. Populations contracted. It's sometimes called the year without a summer. 40 years later, the railway boom was in full acceleration. The infrastructure that would define the next century was being laid into place, ahead of the people it would serve. Tartaria isn't a claim. It's a lens. A way of asking whether the story of the 19th century, the story of progress emerging from nothing, systems appearing fully formed, infrastructure anticipating demand with unusual precision, is complete. The railways were built. The stations still stand. The records exist. The timing remains difficult to reconcile. Whether that reflects vision, inheritance, or something the current framework hasn't yet accounted for is a question the evidence invites but doesn't resolve. The infrastructure remains. The questions remain with it.